There's a specific kind of quiet that happens when something ends and no one around you knows yet. Where you're still going through the motions, making coffee, answering texts. And the whole time, there's this thing sitting in your chest that you haven't figured out how to say out loud. Not because you don't have the words, but because saying it makes it real in a way you're not sure you're ready for. I think you know that quiet. I think that might be exactly why you're here right now. This is not a place for answers. I want to be honest with you about that. What it is a place where someone sits down, takes a breath, and finally says the thing. So, someone's about to say it. The 11 p.m. rule. We had a rule. 11 o'clock, every night, no matter what. Didn't matter if Marcus had been in back-to-back meetings since 7 in the morning. Didn't matter if I'd pulled a double at the hospital and my feet felt like they were made of concrete. 11 o'clock, we called. That was the deal we made the night before he flew to Portland, standing in our kitchen in Atlanta, both of us pretending we weren't terrified, both of us making promises the way you do when you need something solid to hold on to. He'd taken a 2-year contract with a structural engineering firm up there. Good money. Career-defining, his mentor had called it. And I understood that. I did. We talked about it for months before he signed anything. Laid it all out on our kitchen table like a blueprint. The finances, the timeline, what we'd do on holidays, how we'd handle the distance. We were planners, Marcus and I. We believed in the architecture of a thing. If you built the structure right, the rest would hold. So we built the 11 o'clock rule, and for the first 4 months it held. I remember those early calls so clearly. I'd be in my scrubs still, sometimes eating leftover rice straight from the container because I hadn't had time to actually cook, and Marcus would be on his laptop with the Portland skyline dark behind him. 3 hours behind me, so it was only 8 for him. But he'd stay up, he'd make the time. We'd talk about nothing for an hour. The weird patient who'd brought his iguana to the ER waiting room. The co-worker of his who pronounced particularly as specifically in every single meeting. Small things. The texture of a regular life, just split across 2 time zones. At the end of every call, one of us would say it first. We traded off. We never discussed it. We just knew. That was our thing. Not that we said that too, but was the one that counted. It meant the distance isn't winning tonight. I don't know exactly when the calls started getting shorter. It wasn't one night. It was gradual, the way a room gets dark when the sun sets, so slow you don't notice until you're suddenly sitting in the dark, wondering when that happened. First it was the length, 40 minutes instead of an hour, then 30. Then there were nights Marcus would pick up and I could tell immediately that he was somewhere else in his head, giving me the surface of his attention while the rest of him was already somewhere I couldn't follow. I'd ask him something and he'd say, and I'd know he hadn't actually heard me. I told myself he was tired. The project was in a critical phase. I'd read about it, the kind of pressure structural engineers are under when a build hits complications. I gave him room. I gave him grace. I gave him so much grace. I started to feel like I was giving it to an empty room. Then his mother started calling him every day. I didn't know that right away. Marcus mentioned it offhand one night, and I laughed because yes, I did know how Evelyn was. Evelyn had opinions about everything. The thread count of our bed sheets, the neighborhood we'd chosen in Atlanta, the fact that I worked nights sometimes, which she felt was her word, unnatural. Marcus always said she meant well, and maybe she did. But meaning well and doing well are 2 different buildings, and Evelyn had never quite understood the difference. I noticed the shift in the language first. It was small. So small I almost didn't catch it. But I'm a nurse. I'm trained to notice the small things, the vital signs that don't look alarming until you put them together, and suddenly the picture changes. Marcus started saying differently. Not as in him and me, as in him and his family. And I said, and he got a little quiet and said, and I sat with that for a second. He'd talked to his father about extending his contract before he'd talked to me. His wife, the person he'd made the 11 o'clock rule with. I didn't make a big thing of it, I said. And we did. And he said it was just preliminary, just thinking out loud. And I believed him. I wanted to believe him. You know that thing where you see something clearly, and then you decide not to. because seeing it would require you to do something about it. And you're not ready? That's where I was, standing right at the edge of knowing, choosing not to look down. It was a Tuesday in March, 5 months into the contract, 10 days before our 3rd anniversary. I'd been planning something, nothing elaborate, just a surprise. I'd requested the weekend off from work, cleared it with my supervisor 2 weeks in advance, and I'd booked a flight to Portland. I was going to show up at his apartment with Indian food from the place we'd loved in Atlanta. I'd found a spot in Portland that had the same lamb Rogan Josh. I'd actually called ahead and ordered it. And I was going to be there when he opened the door. I'd pictured his face. I'd pictured it so many times. I was at the gate at Hartsfield-Jackson when my phone rang. Not Marcus, his sister Dana. Which was strange, because Dana and I were friendly but not friendly. I said, long pause, the kind that tells you everything before the words do. I exhale slowly. Even now, sitting here telling you this, I can feel that exact moment in my chest. The gate number above me. The smell of airport coffee and carpet cleaner. The way my carry-on suddenly felt very heavy. He had not told me. His mother had planned an anniversary dinner for my husband, in Portland, where his family had apparently been visiting him, staying with him, filling his apartment and his evenings and the hours that used to belong to our 11 o'clock calls, and Marcus had not said a single word to me about any of it. I didn't get on the plane. I sat in a chair by the window and I watched my flight board without me, and I called Marcus, and when he picked up I could hear voices in the background, his mother's laugh, the clink of what sounded like dishes. I said, a beat. And something in that sentence, like I hadn't been a person, like all these months of 11 o'clock calls, all these nights of, like that didn't count as. I said, silence. And I didn't say it loud. I want you to know that. I didn't yell. My voice was very quiet and very even, the way it gets when I'm past the shaking part and into something deeper. He said, and I remember this exactly. I will remember it until I'm very old, he said. And there it was, the door closing. He didn't say anything. I laugh a little, and it's not the good kind. It's the kind that comes out when something is so precisely awful that your body doesn't know what else to do with it. I drove home from the airport in a kind of fog, autopilot. I remember the highway looked strange, too bright, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. I got home and stood in the kitchen for a long time. Our kitchen, where we'd made the blueprint, where we'd stood and promised each other things. I didn't call him that night. For the first time in 5 months, 11 o'clock came and went and neither of us called. I don't think he noticed until midnight. The days after that were the kind of quiet that has a texture. Not peaceful quiet, the other kind, the kind that presses. I went to work. I came home. I'd pick up my phone and put it down. Pick it up. Put it down. We texted, short and careful, like two people diffusing something they didn't want to name. He came home 3 weeks later for a long weekend, and we had the conversation we'd been circling. It was not a screaming match. I almost wish it had been. Screaming means there's still heat, still something burning. What we had was colder than that. We sat at the kitchen table, same chairs, the blueprint long gone, and Marcus told me that his family had been worried about him, that his mother thought the distance was hard on him, that they'd been trying to support him. I asked him. He said, "You know what's a terrible thing to say to someone who's drowning?" I asked him if his mother had said things about me, about us, about whether this marriage was good for him. He looked at the table, and that look, that's the moment. That's when I knew. Not what she'd said exactly, but that she'd said something. That there had been conversations happening in Portland, in that apartment, around whatever dinners they'd been having. Conversations about my marriage, about me, and I hadn't been in the room. I hadn't even known the room existed. He went back to Portland. The 11 o'clock rule became 9 o'clock, because he said he was tired earlier now. Then it became, and is, how you say when you're not ready to say. I kept waking up at 11, for weeks. My body didn't get the memo. I'd open my eyes in the dark and look at my phone and there'd be nothing, and I'd lie there in the specific silence of a bed that used to feel temporary and was starting to feel permanent. I want to ask you something, if you're still here with me. And I think you are, because I think you've felt some version of this. Maybe not this exactly, but the shape of it. The feeling of being slowly edited out of your own life, of watching someone you love choose again and again, in small ways that are easy to explain away, to be somewhere you are not. Have you ever felt yourself disappearing and not known how to make it stop? Because I didn't know. I kept thinking there was a right thing to say, a right moment to reach him. I kept thinking if I could just find the right words, we'd find our way back to the blueprint. But some buildings don't survive what gets built on top of them. We're not together anymore. I won't dress that up. But what I carry isn't really the ending. Endings are clean, in their way. What I carry is the middle. The months of telling myself I was imagining it. The nights I said into a phone and didn't know if it was still true on the other end. The way I can still feel that airport chair, the gate number, the smell of coffee I didn't drink. I still catch myself sometimes at 11 o'clock. Not every night, but sometimes. I'll be reading, or watching something, or just sitting, and the time will catch my eye, and something in me will reach for a phone that isn't going to ring. I don't know what Evelyn said about me in that apartment. I decided eventually that knowing wouldn't change anything. The real wound wasn't what she said. It was that Marcus listened, that he let her voice fill the space where mine should have been, that he looked at me across a kitchen table and saw someone strong enough to handle it, and somehow that meant he didn't have to handle it with me. Maybe that's the thing I'm still sitting with. Not the betrayal of the big moment, the betrayal of all the small ones, the calls that got shorter, that changed meaning, the dinner I wasn't invited to, the way someone can be your person, your blueprint, your 11 o'clock, and still, without meaning to, without even noticing, let you go. He let me go without knowing he was doing it, and I held on without knowing it was already over. Some things don't end, they just stop. No door closing, no last conversation you can point to and say, there, that's where it went. Just a message, just silence before the message. Just you, standing in the middle of a life that was supposed to be shared, realizing you're the only one still standing in it. There's a particular kind of alone that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives when you look around the room and understand, really understand, that no one is coming. That whatever you're holding right now, whatever is growing or breaking or too large to name, you are holding it by yourself. In the dark. In a room that used to feel like enough. She didn't plan to be here. She didn't plan for any of this. But here is where she is. 4 walls, a secret, and the specific silence of someone who hasn't figured out yet who to call. Or if there's anyone left to call at all. Original. The morning it finally broke open, I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a mug I'd already washed once. That's the kind of thing pregnancy does to you. You move through the same motions twice, 3 times, because your body needs something to do while your mind is somewhere else entirely. The water was too hot. I could feel it turning my fingers red, but I didn't move them. I just stood there watching the steam rise and listening to the sound of Patrice's slippers on the hardwood floor behind me. She had a particular walk, unhurried, like every room she entered had been waiting for her. I should back up. Or maybe I shouldn't. Maybe this is exactly where the story lives, right here at this sink, right here in this kitchen that never felt like mine. My husband's name is Daniel. He's the kind of man who is very good at seeming reasonable. That's the most precise way I know how to say it. When you describe him to other people, you sound paranoid. You sound like you're searching for something to complain about. He opens doors. He remembers birthdays. He uses words like, and in a way that makes you feel, for a moment, like you are the most considered person in any room. I fell in love with that. I want to be honest about that part. I chose this. His mother's name is Patrice. She is 63 years old and she smells like a specific brand of powder that I've never been able to identify, and now can never smell without my stomach going tight. She has silver hair she keeps pinned back, always. And she wears reading glasses on a chain around her neck even when she's nowhere near anything to read. She had opinions about everything. The correct way to load a dishwasher, the correct thread count for guest towels, the correct way to pronounce the name of a French cheese. And she delivered these opinions in a tone that was almost gentle, almost like she was doing you a favor. We moved into her house when I was 11 weeks pregnant. It wasn't supposed to be permanent. That's what Daniel said. The house was beautiful if you like that kind of thing. Old, high ceilings, a staircase that creaked on the fourth step no matter how carefully you placed your foot. There was a room at the end of the upstairs hallway that Patrice called the guest room, and that was where Daniel and I slept. And I understood from the first night that this was not a metaphor. I was the guest. We both were, technically, but Daniel had grown up in this house. He knew which drawer stuck and which window let in the cold. He was home. I was visiting. I'd started a small corner in the guest room for the baby. Just a corner. A second-hand rocking chair I'd found at an estate sale, painted white, with a cushion I'd made myself from fabric I'd ordered online. A soft yellow with tiny printed rabbits on it. I'd folded 3 receiving blankets on the seat. I'd put a small wooden letter, the first letter of a name I'd written in a notebook and not shown anyone, on the windowsill where the afternoon light would catch it. Patrice came in to change the curtains one afternoon and stood looking at the corner for a long moment. She didn't say anything right away. She folded the old curtains over her arm and looked at the rocking chair and then looked at me and said, "You know this room is going to be needed for Daniel's aunt in the fall." I said I thought we'd be gone by then. She smiled. It was a very particular smile, the kind that says without actually saying it. "Of course," she said. "Of course you will." And she left. And I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at my little corner and tried to remember what I'd been feeling when I set it up. I couldn't quite get back to it. The days had a shape in that house. Patrice woke early and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper, and there was an unspoken understanding that this hour belonged to her. I learned to wait upstairs until I heard her move to the living room before I came down. I learned to rinse my dishes immediately and put them away, rather than leaving them in the drying rack. I learned to ask before I rearranged anything in the refrigerator, or opened a window, or turned the thermostat up even a degree. I was 31 years old and 6 months pregnant, and I was asking permission to open a window. I told Daniel this. I sat on the edge of our bed one night, the guest bed, the bed with Patrice's chosen comforter and Patrice's chosen colors, and I said. He was looking at his phone. He put it down. He gave me his full attention, which is something Daniel is good at, the performance of full attention. He said, "She's just set in her ways. She's not trying to make you feel that way." I said, "I know she's not trying. That's almost worse." He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Mara, just my name, said in a particular way, the way that means." The incident happened on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I'd had a prenatal appointment that morning, and the midwife had told me the baby was measuring perfectly, and I'd driven home with that small good thing held carefully in my chest like something I didn't want to spill. Patrice was in the kitchen when I got back. She was making soup. She made soup on Tuesdays, a thing I had cataloged about her the way you catalog things when you're trying to predict the weather in a place you don't fully understand. I set my bag down and I said the baby was doing well, that the appointment had gone fine, and Patrice stirred her soup and nodded and said, "Good." And then, without turning around, she said, "I've been meaning to ask you something." I waited. "Is your mother planning to come when the baby arrives? To help?" I said yes, probably. We'd been talking about it. She turned then. She looked at me with those reading glasses hanging against her chest and she said, "Because I want to be clear about the capacity of this house. I can't have 2 households of people here at the same time. It wouldn't work." I said I understood. "It's just," she said, and she paused and she stirred the soup again. "Your mother and I have very different ideas about how things should be done. I think it's better if we're realistic about that now." I said quietly, "She's my mother. She'd be coming to help with her grandchild." And Patrice looked at me over the rim of the pot. Not a coffee cup, a pot, but the gesture was the same. And she said, "Mara, I'm sure she means well. But some women need a lot of support after birth, and some women just get on with it. I raised Daniel alone for 2 years when his father left. No one came to hold my hand." She said it pleasantly, like a thing that was simply true, Like she was offering me information about herself rather than a verdict about me. The soup smelled like rosemary and something else I couldn't name. I said, okay, and I picked up my bag and I went upstairs. Sigh. I keep coming back to the way she said. The way it wasn't about my mother at all. Not really. It was about me. What kind of woman I was. Whether I was the kind who could handle things. And the worst part, the part I've never said out loud, is that for a moment, I believed her. I stood at the top of that creaking staircase and I thought, that's what isolation does. It doesn't arrive loudly. It seeps in through the small cracks. You stop trusting your own read on things. You start doing the math on your own feelings before you let yourself have them. I sat in the rocking chair in the corner of the guest room and I put my hand on my stomach and I breathed. Daniel came home at 6. I heard his car. I heard him talking to his mother in the kitchen, the easy back and forth of people who share a language I'd never quite learned. I heard her laugh at something. A real laugh, open and unguarded. I didn't go down for dinner. I said I wasn't feeling well, which was true in every way that mattered. He came up around 8. He sat on the edge of the bed and he said, "She mentioned you seemed upset." I said, "She told me my mother couldn't come when the baby is born." He frowned. She didn't say that exactly. She said, "Daniel." He stopped. "I was there," I said. "I know what she said." He was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hands. He said, "She's not trying to exclude your mom. She just worries about the house getting—" "I know what she's trying to do," I said. "I'm asking what going to do." And here is the thing about Daniel. Here's the thing I have turned over and over in the months since. He looked at me with genuine care on his face. Real, warm, concerned care. And he said, "I just think we need to give this time. She'll come around. She just needs to see that you're—" He stopped himself. I said that I'm what? He said, "Nothing. That things are going to be fine." But I'd heard the pause. I'd heard what he'd almost said. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark in that house with the creaking staircase and the curtains Patrice had chosen, and I thought about the notebook in my bag. The one with the name written in it. I thought about how I'd written it in pencil, not pen. Like some part of me had known to leave room for revision. I thought about calling my mother. It was late. Too late. But I thought about it. I had her number pulled up on my phone twice. Both times I put it back down. What would I have said? You know that feeling when the thing you need to say is so large that it doesn't fit through the opening of a phone call? When you're so far past the point where you can start at the beginning? I put the phone down and I looked at the ceiling and I put my hand on my stomach again. The baby moved, a small rolling shift like a question. I want to be honest about the baby. Because this is the part I've never gotten quite right when I've tried to explain it to myself, late at night, in the language of, and the baby was the reason I stayed, and the baby was the reason I couldn't. Every time I thought about packing that little corner, the yellow fabric, the wooden letter, the folded blankets, something in me resisted. Because this was supposed to be the beginning. This was supposed to be the part of my life that was full. And I kept thinking that if I could just hold on long enough, if I could just be patient enough, reasonable enough, small enough, eventually there would be room for me in my own story. That's the thing no one tells you about despair. It doesn't always look like giving up. Sometimes it looks like trying harder. Sometimes it looks like washing a mug you've already washed, standing at a sink with the water too hot, waiting for a woman's slippers on the floor behind you, telling yourself that today might be different. It wasn't different. The weeks that followed were more of the same, only quieter. Patrice and I moved around each other in that kitchen like weather systems that had agreed not to collide. Daniel continued to seem reasonable. He continued to use words like, "and." He continued to hear me without listening, which is its own particular skill, and I continued to let him, which is mine. I stopped setting up the corner of the guest room. I put the wooden letter in my bag, in the notebook, next to the name. I stopped telling Daniel things, not all at once. It happened the way most erosions happen, gradually. So gradually you don't notice until you look back and see how much ground is gone. I almost called my mother 17 times. I counted. Chuckle. Not because it's funny. Because what else do you do with a number like that? 17 times. 17 times I needed her, and talked myself out of it because I didn't want her to worry. because I didn't want to explain from the beginning, because I didn't want to say out loud that I'd built my life inside a house where I was tolerated and called it home. There's no clean ending to give you. The baby came, healthy, perfect, furious about being born, which I took as a good sign. My mother came too, for 2 weeks, and Patrice was polite in the way that cost something, and Daniel was grateful to everyone for keeping the peace, and I smiled and nodded and held my daughter and tried to feel the thing I was supposed to feel. I felt it sometimes. I want to say that. There were moments, just her and me, early morning, the house quiet, where everything else fell away and it was only this. Her weight in my arms, her breath, the particular smell of her head. Those moments were real. They were the most real thing in that house. But I was still in the guest room, and some part of me understood finally that no amount of patience was going to change that. I think about that rocking chair sometimes, the yellow fabric with the rabbits. I'd made the cushion myself, which I'd never done before. I'd followed a tutorial online and done it badly and then done it again, and it still wasn't quite even, but it was mine. I'd made it with my hands for a person who didn't exist yet. There's something in that I'm still working out. What it means to make something imperfect for someone you already love. What it means to keep making things even when the room you're making them in doesn't belong to you. I'm not sure I have the words for it yet. But I think about that cushion. I think about the way the afternoon light came through the window and caught the wooden letter on the sill. I think about standing at that sink with the water too hot, and the steam rising, and the sound of slippers on hardwood behind me. And I think, I was there. I was really there. Even when no one was looking at me, I was there. That's the thing I'm holding on to. That I was there. There's a kind of alone that doesn't make a sound. You just carry it. Room to room. Day to day. Until the weight of it becomes the only thing you know how to hold. Someone else found her way here tonight. She's 32. And her marriage is over. And she's not asking for anything, really. No verdict, no comfort, no fixing. She just needs someone to know what happened. So, we're going to listen. I used to count the coffee cups. Every morning before I even opened my eyes all the way, I'd listen. For the sound of the second burner clicking on. For the particular way Marcus filled the kettle. Always too full, always a little splash on the counter he never wiped up. I'd lie there in the gray light coming through the curtains I'd picked out, curtains the color of old sea glass, and I would count. 2 cups meant he'd stayed. 1 cup meant I'd made coffee for myself sometime in the night and hadn't registered that I was alone until just then. I got very good at not registering things. Our apartment was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like radiator dust and someone else's cooking. Cumin, always, from the unit below us. We had a kitchen with a window that faced a brick wall, which sounds depressing, and sometimes it was. But in the mornings when the light hit that brick a certain way, it went almost amber. And I used to think, this is enough. This is a good life. I genuinely thought that. I want you to know I wasn't blind, or naive, or someone who didn't know better. I was someone who had decided that what we had was worth protecting. His name was Marcus, and when things were good, they were good in a way that made you feel like you'd been living in black and white before, and someone had finally adjusted the color. He laughed with his whole chest. He remembered the names of my coworkers' kids. He used to leave notes, actual handwritten notes, not texts, tucked into my coat pocket before I left for work. Little things. You're going to be the smartest person in the room today. You always are. That kind of thing. I kept them in a shoebox on the 3rd shelf of the closet, the one I could only reach if I stood on my toes. I'm Nadia, by the way. That's me. That's who was keeping the notes in the shoebox. We had rules, the way couples do. Not rules you write down, just rules you absorb over time, the ones that settle into the walls of a relationship like smoke. One of them was that Marcus's phone was his. I don't mean he said that, he never said that. It was just understood. I had learned, sometime in the 1st year, that asking who he was texting made the air in the room change. Not dramatically, just a degree or 2 colder. And I had learned that I didn't like the cold, so I stopped asking. I told myself that was trust. I told myself that's what mature love looked like. I stopped calling my sister back around month 8. Not because anything happened between us. just because explaining my life had started to feel like defending it, and I didn't have the energy for both. Priya would ask questions, not mean ones, just Priya ones, the kind where she's looking at you with that particular tilt of her head, and I would feel myself getting tired before I even opened my mouth. It was easier to just be in it than to describe it from the outside. And I was happy. I need to say that again because it matters. I was happy. Or I was something close enough to happy that I couldn't tell the difference yet. It was a Tuesday in February when things cracked open, and it was a Tuesday in the most Tuesday way possible. Nothing special, nothing cinematic, just a gray afternoon, and me home early because a meeting had been canceled, and I'd thought, good, I'll start dinner, he'll come home and it'll be warm in here. I was looking for the good scissors. We had 2 pairs, the bad ones in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus, and the good ones that Marcus kept in the small drawer of the desk in the corner of the living room. His desk, technically, though I'd bought it at the Vintage Market on Clement Street and carried it up 4 flights of stairs myself. The drawer was supposed to have the scissors, a roll of tape, and maybe some dead batteries. That's what was supposed to be in there. What was in there was a receipt from a hotel in the marina, dated 3 weeks before, for 2 nights. I stood there for a long time. Longer than made sense, probably. I kept looking at the receipt like it was a math problem I was close to solving. The hotel was 40 minutes from our apartment. We hadn't gone anywhere together in February. I hadn't gone anywhere in February. My hands were completely steady. I don't know why I remember that my hands were steady, but I do. He came home at 6:15. I was sitting on the couch with the receipt on the coffee table between us like I'd set a place for it. He saw it the second he walked in. I watched him see it. There was this flicker, barely a second, where his face did something honest. And then it stopped. Where did you get that? The drawer. I was looking for the scissors. You went through my desk. I was looking for the scissors, Marcus. There's a hotel receipt. For 2 nights, 3 weeks ago. He sat down across from me. Slowly, like he was managing me. It was for a client. I told you about it. You didn't tell me. I did, Nadia. You just don't listen when I'm talking about work stuff because you check out. You always check out. And then later, you act like I never said anything. Are you sure you want to do this right now? And there it was. Are you sure? Not like he was checking on me. Like he was giving me one last chance to reconsider being upset. Like the generous thing, the smart thing, would be to let it go. To decide I'd misunderstood. I want to tell you, I didn't consider it. I want to tell you that I looked at that receipt and I looked at him and I knew, clearly and immediately, what was true. But I sat there for a moment where I actually thought, what if he did tell me and I forgot? What if I'd been distracted, half listening, and this was my fault? What if the receipt was exactly what he said it was, and I was about to detonate something real over nothing, and he'd never forgive me for it, and I'd lose him, and the curtains the color of sea glass, and the notes in the shoebox, and the amber light on the brick wall in the mornings. That moment lasted about 4 seconds. It felt like standing on the edge of something. I picked up the receipt. I looked at it again. 2 nights. A room rate that was not a corporate discount. A minibar charge. Who were you with? The air went 2 degrees colder. I'm not doing this. And he got up and went to the bedroom and closed the door. Not slammed, closed. Which was somehow worse, because it didn't give me anything to respond to. It just ended the conversation. Like I was a channel he'd turned off. I sat on the couch for a long time after that. The receipt in my hand. The cumin smell drifting up from downstairs. The radiator ticking. I kept thinking, if I push this, I might lose him. And underneath that, quieter, harder to look at. And what exactly would you be losing, Nadia? I didn't leave that night. I want to be honest about that. I didn't even sleep on the couch. I went to bed, and he was already there, and I lay on my side of the mattress like I was trying not to take up space. And in the morning there was 1 cup on the counter because he'd left early, and I stood in the kitchen in the amber light, and I made my coffee, and I drank it alone. The next 2 weeks were a kind of quiet war I was fighting mostly against myself. "I'm sorry." He was sorry, he said. Not for the hotel. He never confirmed the hotel, never denied it in any way that gave me something solid to hold. But sorry that I was feeling this way. Sorry that communication had broken down. These were his phrases, and they were good phrases. The kind that sound like accountability but contain none. The kind that make you feel like you've been handed something when actually your pockets are still empty. How long has it felt like this? I called Priya, finally. I sat on the bathroom floor with the fan on so Marcus couldn't hear me through the wall, and I told her some of it. Not all of it, but some. She didn't tilt her head at me through the phone. She just said, "How long has it felt like this?" And I started to answer, and then I stopped, because the answer was longer than I'd admitted to myself. The moment of clarity, and I know people expect this to be big, some neon-lit revelation, but it wasn't, was on a Sunday morning, 2.5 weeks after the receipt. Marcus was in the shower. I was standing on my toes, reaching for the shoebox on the third shelf. I don't know what I was looking for. Maybe I just wanted to hold the notes. Maybe I wanted to remember who I'd been when someone was writing them. The box was lighter than I expected. I opened it. Some of the notes were still there. But not all of them, maybe half. And I couldn't tell you when they'd stopped, or why, because I had not been paying attention. I had been so focused on not losing what we had that I had not noticed what we'd already lost. I put the box back. I went to the kitchen. I made 1 cup of coffee, just one, deliberately, intentionally. And I sat at the table with the brick wall window and I drank it slowly. That was it. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just me deciding to count accurately. I called Priya back that afternoon and told her the rest of it. Then I called a friend from work, someone I'd been canceling on for months, and I said, "Can we get dinner this week?" She said yes before I finished the sentence. I started going to therapy on a Thursday in March. Dr. Osei's office had a plant in the corner that was doing surprisingly well, and I found that comforting in a way I couldn't explain. I sat in the chair across from her and I said, "I think I've been making myself smaller to fit into something that was getting smaller too." She nodded slowly. She said, "Tell me about smaller." So I did. Marcus and I didn't end in a single scene. There was no door slam, no final confrontation where I said everything I'd rehearsed in the shower. It was slower than that, a gradual withdrawal, a reclaiming of small things. I stopped waiting up. I stopped adjusting my plans around his silences. I told him, one evening in April, standing in the kitchen with the bad scissors in my hand because I'd finally just started using those, that I didn't think this was working anymore. "You're giving up." I thought about that for a second. The way he said it. Giving up, like I was abandoning something worth keeping. Like I was the one who'd made the choice that mattered. No. And I meant it in a way I wouldn't have been able to mean it 6 months earlier. I'm just done carrying it by myself. He moved out in May. Took the desk, which was fine. Left the curtains, which was also fine. I stood at the kitchen window the first morning after and made my coffee and looked at the brick wall going amber in the light, and I thought, this is still a good life. Not the same thought as before. Not the thought of someone holding their breath. I called Priya that morning. She picked up on the second ring. "How are you?" And it was a real question, a Priya question, the kind with a head tilt in it. I exhaled, like I'd been saving it. I think I'm starting to find out. The shoebox is still on the third shelf. I haven't moved it. I don't stand on my toes to reach it anymore. I just leave it there, a little lighter than it used to be, which is maybe the right weight for something you're not carrying anymore. Just keeping... There's something about hearing 3 stories that are really one story, just told from different angles, different rooms, different moments of realizing the floor had gone out from under you. A message, silence before it, and then the part nobody tells you about, the part where you have to keep existing after. If you found yourself in any of that, if something landed a little too close, I'm not going to pretend I know what you're carrying right now, but I think you do. And I think some part of you came here tonight because you needed to hear that someone else had stood exactly where you're standing, in that specific kind of quiet, and survived the not knowing. You know that feeling when you keep replaying a moment, not because you think you'll find a different ending, but because you're still trying to understand how it was real. That's not weakness. That's what it looks like to love something that's gone. It doesn't have to make sense yet. It doesn't have to make sense for a long time. If there's something you've been holding, something that doesn't have a name yet, something you can't say to anyone who knows your face, you can say it here. The link is below. No names, no judgment. Just someone on the other end, listening like it matters. Because it does. And if tonight is sitting heavy in a way that goes beyond grief, if you need a different kind of voice, I'll leave a number below too. Somewhere tonight, someone sent a message they've been drafting in their head for months. Someone read a message they never thought would come. And someone is sitting in a room, very still, just beginning to understand that their life has divided itself into before and after. All three of them are doing the only thing any of us can do. They're still here,